I guess you could say, unlike anything I've ever experienced in 33 years of business, the last 3 years have ushered in, I think, kind of a renaissance or an awakening, if you will, in alternative assets. And we've seen a larger groundswell of people who are interested now for the first time ever in precious metals. And the physical world I've said for a very long time, Kai, and I get a lot of heat for it. Maybe I don't do a good enough job in explaining myself, if you will. I believe in my soul that this market ultimately will be defined by an inability to readily source product. I received an email from one of the largest distributors in the world. And in looking at what they were offering, honest to God, almost every single silver item that they had said sold out, or if it wasn't, it was limited and or delayed. And gold, not so much. I think ultimately that will happen with gold. But the reason I say it will define the marketplace, number one, it's been very difficult to get stuff, and it's getting difficult. But this is with, as Rick Rule, my friend, often talks about, a 0.5% allocation to precious metals. And throughout the entire financial matrix, from Joe Sixpack on the street to the Harvard Endowment Fund. So when you're talking about just how difficult it is to get precious metals right now, that's with 0.5%. Now, if you go back to 1980, we had an 8% allocation to precious metals. And by extrapolation, if you pick the mean or the average of the last 40 years, that's 2.5%. In other words, anyone who has metals on average would have 2.5% of their assets, of their investable assets, in precious metals. Well, that would represent a five-fold increase in demand in this industry that it certainly cannot handle. So in general, the supply has been okay, but it's getting harder and harder and harder. And part of the reason that is that you have an awakening to inflation and geopolitical issues globally. And so all of these countries are experiencing inflation. All of these countries are not immune to geopolitical issues and strife. And so you have a global demand source or base that is competing for product. And, in the years that I've been doing this, in the 33 years I've been doing this, a lot of the time I've been doing this, dollar assets were king. Stocks, bonds, real estate, everything was hunky-dory. There was no reason to worry about protecting your purchasing power. And so we didn't have to compete with most of the world for product. I would have distributors that would call me and say, listen, let me source or stage, they would say, how about 50,000 silver kangaroos? I'll put them in your vault. I'd say, listen, I don't need them right now. But they'd say, how about we send them to you, put them in your vault. If we need them back, we'll pay to have them shipped back. And in the meantime, you have them there if you need them. Won't charge you anything for them until you use them. Great, I said. So now we're buying product 4, 6, 8 weeks in advance, running logistics, hedging it, and watching it from the time that it leaves the mint in Austria or Australia or the UK, watching it as it gets through customs, running logistics to get it on a Brinks truck and get it across the country, receiving it, checking it in, and before it's even fully checked in, most of it has been pre-sold. This is what it's like nowadays, and that's when you talk about a supply chain world we live in. Well, precious metals are not immune to that. I guess in a nutshell, I think it will be the defining characteristic of this market. It's already getting very, very tough. And if we look at what's happening on the COMEX market and the LME, the London Metals Exchange, I think from the top down, it portrays much more difficulty getting product, because what we are seeing both on the LME and the COMEX are record withdrawals, to the point where silver is being bled off of the exchanges at record levels. So you're seeing massive drawdowns on the COMEX, huge drawdowns out the back door of the ETFs by the authorized participants. So you're seeing a bleeding away of physical metal off of the exchanges, where these are the exchanges that provide the 1,000-ounce bars to the mints to make the coins. So it's kind of a trickle-down thing, where I think ultimately the mints are going to have a harder time getting silver, kind of like the US Mint does right now. And that ultimately is going to feed into what I believe will be a market defined by a very difficult time sourcing product easily and affordably. Well, the central banks and the commercial banks. So, if you look at what's happening in terms of gold, and you said who's doing it, one of the things that was unusual, Kai, was in 2020, we saw a new group of reportables off the Commitment of Traders report. So every week, the COMEX market publishes a report that shows the positioning of the largest traders on the exchange. And my entire career, there were two traders. There was the commercials and the specs, as they're called, which are the hedge funds. And there are lots of traders on COMEX, but the biggest ones, the biggest positions are portrayed on the Commitment of Traders report. And it was always just two groups: commercials, JP Citi, Goldman, Bank of America, hedge funds called the specs. And as one would go long, the other would go short. And then in 2020, we see this new group of traders called the others. And these are supposedly sovereign wealth funds and family offices. So we saw in one day, 41% of all the gold kilo bars taken off of the COMEX. Now, typically the sovereign mints or the sovereign entities like the central banks, they don't buy the kilos. They buy good delivery bars, either 100 or 400 ounce. I don't even really know why the COMEX holds kilos. Maybe they're mini contracts or whatnot. So the reason I believe it was the others, or the sovereign wealth funds and the family offices who did this, is because you don't see the central banks doing this. In one day, 41% of all of those kilo bars, just under 175 million ounces, was withdrawn off the COMEX market in one day. So who is doing this? The most well-funded, well-informed, influential traders on the globe. I would argue these people are tied into the people pulling the strings at the highest level. So we have seen, literally, if you go back to 2017, we have seen a progression of accumulation and, more importantly and more interestingly, a removal of counterparty risk. As in 2017, we saw, starting with the German Bundesbank, the Bank of Hungary, the Bank of Poland, the Bank of Turkey, the Dutch National Bank, the Bank of Austria, the Czech National Bank, we have seen a progression of withdrawal off of the exchanges. And then these same banks that were repatriating their gold have gone on a buying spree for quite some time. That was front running the 2019 reclassification of gold as a tier 1 reserve asset, and the only other one in the world. And since that moment, we have seen a continuation of accumulation and, most interestingly, taking possession. Pulling it off of the exchanges in an effort to remove counterparty risk. So this is nothing new, and it's something that is continuing to this day. So whether you look at it starting at the top with the central banks who started the trend, so the central banks, the commercial banks, the others, let's call them the sovereign wealth funds and the family offices, or the authorized participants, which are hedge funds and again, commercial banks draining the ETFs, entities draining the London Metal Exchange. And it's a common thread that we are seeing. So the biggest money in the world is front running what's coming. The biggest money in the world is always closest to the information spigot.